Good morning, good afternoon, for some of you, good evening. We've got some people from Europe on this line as well. My name is Ivo Boom. I run the US operations for Servoy. I've been doing that for the last 11 years. We've got two other gentlemen on the call today. I'll introduce them in a second. We're going to keep this webinar series short and sweet, 25 minutes each, and we're going to try to stick to that. We'd like to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions. You can do so in the questions panel, for most of you on the right-hand side. I'll be monitoring those, and I'll be happy to interrupt the two speakers to fire questions away. We're going to talk about modernizations. At Servoy, we've seen and helped ISVs, independent software vendors, and corporate organizations with a lot of those. A lot of companies coming from .NET wanted to modernize, let's say, their older or legacy front ends. We've seen companies coming from Silverlight as well, and obviously from Foxpro, which was a Microsoft company. In this webinar, we're gonna, kind of do a show and tell and share with you what we've seen is successful and what didn't seem to work. Sorry for that. So first of all, I wanted to introduce Jan Eleman. He's a founder of Servoy and an evangelist. He's going to be starting off with the slides. After that, he'll be interrupted by Sean Devlin. Sean is one of our most experienced senior technical engineers. Sorry again for that. Should have had some water before we started. And he's been involved with a lot of .NET projects. So, Jan, before I can't talk anymore, I'm going to hand it over to you right now. Sorry.
Thanks, Ivo. Hi, welcome to this first part one, in which we'll talk about selecting your front end and some of the decisions you have to make in doing so. As Ivo said, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to post them in the questions channel. We will make sure to cover all the questions that are being asked. What we see is that developers think that they have to select the UI component and then glue that to their backend, and they think that's the solution to it. But the problem is that there's more to it than just doing that. And that's what we'll be talking about today. The user experience is important. It's definitely not the same as UI. What does it mean to select those different technologies, and what is really involved in implementing a front end? So let's get started. But first of all, let's set the stage by talking a little bit about UI versus UX. There's definitely a big difference between the two. There's actually a nice image by a UX specialist that I found that sort of recaps the differences. And as you can see on the left-hand side column, there is a lot more to user experience. So the user interface is just a tiny part of a user experience, but it begins with research. It is about interviewing your users, about testing what works, about gathering statistics, creating personas, all the way to integrating and working together with the software developers to deliver a great user experience. So this is definitely the place where you want to start with your whole journey as you start to modernize your applications. As we all know, there's a huge choice in UI frameworks. Over 1,000 UI frameworks exist today. Let me actually show you a couple of them so you get an idea. This is one of them, Bootswatch. It's technically based on Bootstrap and offers different implementations and look and feels even, as you can see in this 6 examples on the screen. Works both for desktop and mobile devices. Here's another one, Ionic, with a great mobile experience. And even if you go into a single subtype of UI components, like material design, started by Google. There are even top 10 listings for that. That's the myriad of options that you can choose from in the UI world. In the Microsoft world, Microsoft introduced the Metro UI some time ago. There are also loads of different UI implementations that you can choose from. Twitter Bootstrap, very popular and also very affordable. If you look at popular UI components that were used in the .NET thick client days, then you would typically pay $2,000 to $5,000 per developer to get access to a UI library. But now, with HTML5, UI frontends have become very affordable, as you can see in this slide. Many Twitter Bootstrap and their great UI components out there are available for as little as $10 to completely revamp your user interface. Obviously, another important one is Kendo UI from Telerik. Telerik is a well-known brand name in the .NET world, as they've been delivering .NET UI components for many years. Great set of components. That's one of the choices that you have as well. But the big question as you start moving into this modernization steps is, have you looked at all your non-functional requirements as you're moving to a browser-based experience, to a cross-platform experience on mobile devices, on phones, tablets, and desktop? There are a series, and these are just 10 of the 12 of the common non-functional requirement patterns. Are they covered? And this should be on your list. If it's not, then you should put it there. Have you looked at the deployment of whatever modernization framework you're using? How about compliancy? How about consistency across systems? How about multilingual support? How about multi-tenancy? All things that you should be looking at. What we've been seeing with a lot of software development companies is that unfortunately the user experience is often an afterthought. So very often companies start spending a lot of time building non-functional requirements by themselves, building their own technology for security, for scaling, for languages. Well, we've seen the list on the previous slide. Then spend time on business logic, and at the end start thinking and working on user experience. And that is very often too late if you do it as an afterthought. The optimal way of doing it is doing it the opposite way, is to start with the user experience, start with the customer journey, then connect it to your business logic or write your business logic, and then look at your non-functional requirements by selecting platforms that help you with doing that. And delivering a great user experience for complex applications. We typically work with customers that build ERP type of applications for large, advanced applications. Is very difficult to do. And the slide you're looking at here is one of our customers who has an ERP in the fashion industry. And they really made it their key point, the user experience. How can we deliver a great UX for something as complex as an ERP? And one of their definitions of done that they've included in their sprints is we need existing customers from our old .NET application to be able to use our new browser-based system without any training. That was one of the definitions of done. And every sprint they test if this is working, and if it's not, it goes back to the development and UX team for improvements. And we think that you should be looking at that as well. So Sean, moving a bit more to the technical side of things.
Yeah, well, I'm working day to day with companies that are doing rewrites or modernizing existing applications, and we are seeing that they want to have great UX, but we're also seeing where they struggle with that. And one of the things that we see is that inherently, because they're a technical company, that their architecture is driving their user experience, and that as a result they get a compromised experience for the end user. And it sounds simple enough to say that you have to go UX first, and that means consider first what experience you want and then build to suit that. But it can be difficult for a software vendor, which is usually front to back a technical organization, for them to see it this way. You get a lot of, I think, sort of infection in the thinking that because the back end looks, is built one way, that we have to deliver according to that. We've seen the opposite when companies deliver great UX, when they involve a UX design process from the beginning, from the very moment they say, what are we going to build? And they involve a UX expert, for example, and they tailor all of their subsequent actions about how they get there around that. And it includes the UI, selecting the right components or whatever, but it's much more than that. A UX designer is really focused on the end user and what their goals are. And if you can make a user achieve more goals in a day, they will be happy, whether or not it looks one way or another. So they consider that user, their goals, and their emotions as they interact with the product. And it's a UX expert will do customer journeys. They'll analyze the personas of the end user. So you may have one screen which is generic and very flexible, and a designer or a developer might be very proud of it, but the screen is built to serve 5 different kinds of users. And so if you actually think, well, who are my users and what goals are they trying to achieve, you might say, hey, this is not one screen anymore. This is now going to be 3 screens that will satisfy 5 users doing different things. They have different goals. So you want to analyze their tasks, what they're trying to achieve. You want to really classify what information you're providing to them, and you want to analyze how you're doing. So there's even some feedback involved for KPIs. Next slide, please. Yeah. So to revisit what Jan said, that you can't just pick your components and connect them to the back end, and because you picked great components, you therefore get great UX. You might get great UI, things might look great, but the user will still be having their experience based on architecture. So there's some other things to consider in addition to front-end technologies. You want to make a decision about responsive or adaptive, if you go that route, and to what degree you do it. But also, you want to consider what's happening at the middle tier, at your web server. So a web server can do just serving up pages, or it can do a lot more. There can be some session management going on the middle tier. There can also be some session-related things in the front end. So how do you divide up caching? Where do you put logic? Do you put logic about the UI in the browser, and do you put logic about the user and what they're doing in the middle tier? So you really need to think about splitting these up to get great UX, because if you just map a component to some back-end database or service, then you're going to get a feeling from the user that you have something very transactional, very heavy. You also want to think about how you communicate between the browser and the server, WebSockets or AJAX or page refreshes, etc. I mentioned responsive and adaptive, and I hear a lot from folks that we work with. They say we want responsive, we want mobile first or omni-channel or whatever industry buzzword is popular. So maybe it helps to just define what these are. Responsive and adaptive are similar. Responsive is something which is changing continually to the amount of screen real estate, versus adaptive is something you design for several fixed screen sizes so that you can support different devices. So they're both similar in that the regard that they fit the size of the device that you're using. But it's not a magical solution. It's not something that you just turn on all the time. you still, if you go the route of responsive or adaptive, you have to build for it, you have to test for it, every part of your UI. So you can't just say, well, our application is responsive and therefore it works. Therefore, it's better UX. You need to decide which parts will be responsive or not. You can still have absolute position combined with responsive. So it involves design from the beginning. You don't just turn it on. And responsive UI doesn't necessarily equate to just a very dynamic user experience. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, you still have to do caching somewhere. And what we've seen in the past is if you build everything from scratch, you're going to be caching in the browser, perhaps you're going to be caching in the middle tier, and we've seen a lot of heavy front-end coding going into applications. People are writing business logic for the browser. They're doing sometimes business logic related to data in the browser to try to make up for a user experience that's lost when you're just mapping directly to a back end, to try to get around that heavy transactional feel. But this correlates to an increase in the amount of code you have to support and test and maintain. And when it's not done correctly, and it's difficult to do correctly, then you can lose performance as well. You can start to see a performance problem because you get in pretty deep in the front end. So it helps to be able to really properly deal with your session management at the right place, doing the right things in the middle tier versus the front end. And next slide, please. Yeah, we've seen .NET shops implement their UI basically on top of stateless backend APIs or services or data connectors. And as I said, this can lead to something which is very transactional. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about things like specifics in the user experience, like deferring validation to the end. So we have some component, it maps to a backend data source, and the user interacts with it, and then there's something about that component that does the connection for us, right? So they might have to wait until the end of entering all their data before they get some validation, and then they get back a dialogue with what went wrong, and then they go back and they redo it again. You don't get that dynamic thing where, if you tab out of a field, we do some quick custom validation, etc. Maybe you check a checkbox and then two more fields become enabled because you check that checkbox and it fills in a default value for one of them. You don't get that by hooking up a component to the back end. You have to do that piecemeal. So if you do that from scratch, you're putting a lot of logic and state now into the browser. You have to program that. You have to test it. So really, you want to summarize, what's going to be in the middle, what's going to be at the front. If you can leverage frameworks that do that for you, it's great. If you do it from scratch, it's a lot of work. And then you also want to consider what communication protocols you need, because a front-end technology doesn't magically hook in to your web server. You might be able to quickly deploy it by putting some code in to generate it, but it's not going to do all of the communication magically for you. And if you really want to get a dynamic UI, you get that nuanced communication. So if you're using Ajax or WebSockets, the example I gave of tabbing out and having validation is a good example, because if you think about when I tab out of a field, if I want to validate something, do I do it in the browser, or do I send a small message to the server and say to the web server, okay, I've tabbed out of this field, run some validation. And am I validating a full transaction? Because I haven't tried to save the record yet. So I need to know on the server something about what's going on. So that's one example. Another example is a push notification. If I'm sitting in a browser, typically I don't get a push notification, but more and more that's becoming a UX paradigm. So we want to have, say for example, I'm looking at an inquiry screen, and another user has changed some value, and they save it. Now I'm looking at it. Is it old, or does it automatically update? So we get a data broadcast. That sort of thing you need to consider if you want to have that user experience. There's the low-level communication infrastructure that has to go on. If you have to build that for yourself, again, it's a large amount of testing and work and maintenance. So you get into really deep into the browser server interaction.
All right. Well, thanks for all the technical aspects of selecting UI frameworks, and that we shouldn't forget about the middle tier. So today we've looked at, we've touched four of the non-functional requirements, mainly UI component independence, which you can achieve by having a middle tier that helps you in connecting to multiple front ends. Development efficiency, if you select your right tools and frameworks in the middle layer, you can make the life of your developers much easier. And let's also not forget about performance, delivering applications with sub-second page performance. It's critical for business applications, is the experience of our customers. And also let's not forget about session management. In complex business applications like ERPs, CRMs, it is important to have something that does the session management for you, or you'll have to build it yourself, which can be a huge amount of work and can have compliancy and performance implications and scalability as well. So concluding, and we're still just in time as we committed to 25 minutes, UI frameworks are not the only technology choice you're going to be making if you're modernizing your application, and it definitely should not be the first one you make. You should look at the total scope of how are you going to choose a complete architecture that will allow you to deliver a great user experience for your customers. If you have any questions about today's sessions, feel free to contact any of us. Sean Devlin, if it's more of from a technical nature. Ivo is in sales. Myself, Jan Heineman, I'm the founder of ServeVoice, so I'm a little bit technical, a little bit sales, if those are the things you would like to talk about. And Rutger, if you're in Europe and have any questions. A couple of questions that came in, we summarized in this last slide. Ivo, if there are additional questions coming in the questions channel, then feel free to break in. Good questions that we're seeing here. The first one, we have a very complex ERP. Is going to the browser even viable? This is a good question, and our experience is that if you take your exact same workflow and way of order entry or any process to the browser, then it will not be very user-friendly. However, it's definitely possible to deliver a great UX with a complex business application in the browser. But you will have to start thinking user first, and you will need to take different design choices than you did with a thick client or a native Windows application. The second question, I think, Sean, you have experience in this. Can you sort of touch that?
Yeah. So the question is about, isn't HTML applications, aren't they generally slow, especially a complex application? What would be the performance impact? And certainly we've seen we have seen companies deliver very complex applications that have sub-second performance, and that was one of their non-functional requirements from the beginning. So if they start from that as their requirement and they build to it, it's possible. And the way to do that is to take advantage of the technologies that exist to deliver that. If you start from an existing architecture and you say we're going to hook a component to the back end, and we hope that it'll work quickly, you might end up to be disappointed. But if you start from the premise that it's going to be sub-second per what architecture do we need to support that requirement, then you can be successful. You can take advantage of WebSockets, for example. You can take advantage of a tight interaction between the browser and the web server, such that you do the right things in the browser and the right things on the web server, the right things in the back end. And then certainly you can have a high-performing application.
All right. Let's call this a wrap, guys. The other questions, I think it's going to take too long to answer them right now, and it looks like they will fit in the context of the next webinars, which are listed here. So next week, we're going to talk about business logic, how to tie into your existing business logic and make sure that you don't have to rewrite everything. And we're going to help you with that a little bit.